closet door. I'm here in my studio, aka Board Game Closet. I love this song. I'm worried we use it too much, but it's still a good song. Anyways, before diving into today's nugget of civics, I wanted to thank those of you who have donated to keep this bird in the air. We simply can't make the show without that tried and true public radio standby, listener donations. If you listen to the show and can support it, just go to civics101podcast.org and click donate, or just click the link in our show notes to give a gift in any amount. $5 a month as a sustaining member, it gets you a swanky new Civics 101 face mask. But whatever amount you can give, please know we are going to keep asking people smarter than us to answer your questions about how our country works. Thank you. Thank you. All right, here's the show.
Civics 101 is supported in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
By pushing to get it done before midnight, it sounds, from what we can make of the decision, Rehnquist and the four others who joined him awarded the presidency to George Bush.
And just one other question, then I want to go back to Jeff.
This is Civics 101. I'm Nick Capodice.
And I'm Hannah McCarthy.
And that audio was from a late night in December in 2000 when numerous reporters stood in the cold reading the Supreme Court decision of Bush v. Gore on the courthouse steps, trying their best to analyze it as quickly as possible.
Sorry, Peter, we're still trying to work our way
Yeah, listen, I don't see anybody should be, nobody should be embarrassed
ruling.
about trying to work out a Supreme Court ruling on the fly.
Today, we are answering this listener question. It has happened before that in very close elections, the Supreme Court chose the winner. How does that happen? How does it happen, Nick?
I'm going to start by saying that it rarely happens. 2 times in U.S. history so far, the Supreme Court or its justices were directly involved with deciding the winner of a presidential election. And we'll talk about both of those times. But let's start with what happens when a state's vote count is disputed.
So the big insight here, the thing everyone has to understand, is that elections, like polls, have a margin of error around them.
This is Dan Cassino, professor of political science at Fairleigh Dickinson University.
That is, and this is what we learned in the 2000 election, that if the race is close enough, and by close enough I mean that someone could conceivably say, well, okay, but if you count the ballots this way, I win, versus if you count the ballots this way, the other guy wins. So if you can get the margin where the change in how you're counting the ballots is going to affect the result, at that point, the election is a tie. And because of that, it is not going to be resolved anymore by the voters. It is resolved by elected officials and judges.
When Dan says elected officials, he means the Secretary of State of that state, right?
He does. And to be clear, the federal Secretary of State deals with relationships with other countries. But in most states, the state's Secretary of State is the one who deals with elections.
And in Bush v. Gore in 2000, the Supreme Court essentially said whoever the Secretary of State says won the election, whether they actually won the election or not.
Bush v. Gore, 2000, which allowed the previous vote certification made by Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris to call Florida for George W. Bush. That is the only precedent we have to go on. And maybe we shouldn't even do that because it was what we call a narrow ruling. That term, by the way, has nothing to do with how the justices voted. It means that the decision was written for as specific an instance as possible and that it is not likely to be used as precedent for future cases.
But what could get a state's vote to be challenged in court?
If someone believes the Secretary of State's actions are violating some important part of the Constitution, most likely probably the 14th Amendment, which provides for equal protection under the law, so if you're treating people differently based on whose ballots are getting counted and whose ballots are not getting counted, well, in that case, you can sue, and it's going to go to federal court to decide who the real winner is and how these things should be decided.
You said there was a second time that the Supreme Court was involved. When was that?
That was the election that should be a whole podcast in itself, 1876, between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. This dispute happened when the electors were chosen 40 days after the election.
When we had the electors come in, they registered their votes, and Congress said, yeah, we think there was fraud here.
So Congress put together a commission to decide who got the electoral votes, and that commission included 5 Supreme Court justices. The commission also had one more Republican than a Democrat. Everybody voted on party lines, and they awarded those votes to Hayes.
What does Dan think the process could be like here in 2020? Could it be another Hayes-Tilden or Bush v. Gore?
I've often argued that the president most similar to Donald Trump is, in fact, Andrew Jackson. If Donald Trump loses and says, this was fraud, I shouldn't have lost, this is exactly what Andrew Jackson argues in 1824, he doesn't just go away. He instead decides, nope, I'm going to push forward. I don't care. I'm going to run again in 1828, and I'm going to win that time. I'm not going to let this be taken away from me.
That's Elections in the Supreme Court. Remember, if you have any questions whatsoever that you want us to ask our bevy of talented scholars, just go to civics101podcast.org and click Ask a Question.